Good afternoon or good evening. Summertime, the sun's still shining. In any case, my name is Dr. Josh Franco, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Cuyamaca College. Welcome to our workshop on global conflict and cooperation. Thanks to those of you who are joining live and those of you who are watching the recording. I appreciate you. Let's go ahead and jump right into our description and then our topic for today. So, as you know, this workshop is a series that's focused on defining, exploring, and discussing global conflict and cooperation from the point of view of different international institutions, country governments, and international non-governmental organizations. This has been our schedule for summer 2022. We started with the Summit of the Americas, and then Ukraine, and then Oceans, and then NATO. And past 2 weeks, we had Iran and Saudi Arabia. Today, we'll be talking about space. All right. And if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself or to just post them in the chat, and I'll answer them as I'm going through the presentation. Okay. So space. This picture to your left that you see here, I want to highlight it because this was the image, the first image that was shared from the James Webb Space Telescope that gives us a view of the universe that we would have never been able to see without this technology in space. We'll talk a little bit more about the James Webb Telescope in a few slides. So our learning objectives with this workshop are the following. First is to define space. Secondly is to explain a real-world example of conflict related to outer space. And then third is to explain a real-world example of cooperation related to outer space. So a little bit about space itself. You might think, well, space is space, right? Well, let's get a slightly more precise definition. So what is space? Well, according to space.com, space is an almost perfect vacuum, nearly void of matter and with extremely low pressure. In space, sound doesn't carry because there aren't enough molecules close enough together to transmit sound between them. Not quite empty bits of gas, dust, and other matter floats around emptier areas of the universe, while more crowded regions can host planets, stars, and galaxies. And I do have a link here to space law. You might be asking, well, what's that about? Let's pull that up, which we'll talk about in a little more detail in a few more slides. There is a United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, and there is a topic called space law. And I'm actually going to have this read to us because it's pretty fascinating to hear about. So I'll go ahead.
Space law. Space law can be described as the body of law governing space-related activities. Space law, much like general international law, comprises a variety of international agreements, treaties, conventions, and United Nations General Assembly resolutions, as well as rules and regulations of international organizations. Photo. UN photo. The term space law is most often associated with the rules, principles, and standards of international law appearing in the 5 international treaties and 5 sets of principles governing outer space, which have been developed under the auspices of the United Nations. In addition to these international instruments, many states have national legislation governing space-related activities. Space law addresses a variety of matters, such as, for example, the preservation of the space and Earth environment, liability for damages caused by space objects, the settlement of disputes, the rescue of astronauts, the sharing of information about potential dangers in outer space, the use of space-related technologies, and international cooperation. A number of fundamental principles guide the conduct of space activities, including the notion of space as the province of all humankind, the freedom of exploration and use of outer space by all states without discrimination, and the principle of non-appropriation of outer space. The Office provides information and advice, upon request, to governments, non-governmental organizations, and the general public on space law in order to promote understanding, acceptance, and implementation of the international space law agreements concluded under United Nations auspices.
So there you have a very complete definition of what space law is. And just this idea that there's laws associated with the universe is pretty cool. So I like to share that up front. So with that in mind, what are some of the space actors that are involved? Well, I'll start here. We have NASA, which is the space agency here for the United States. We have JAXA, which is for the country of Japan. We have the Chinese space program, the Russian space program, the European Space Agency, the Indian Space Research Organization, and other countries do have space programs or research programs, but these are the most prominent ones. And so these are all basically funded by their country governments. And most of this work is civilian, but there are military elements and applications, both that we're aware of and ones that we aren't aware of. But these are the major space actors in addition to the countries themselves. So like when the United States government takes a position on a treaty or signs into a treaty with other countries, it's taking a policy position in partnership or maybe in conflict with other nations. And then these agencies are the operationalization of those relationships between countries in the form of their particular space programs, whether they're civilian or military. So what's some conflict? Well, the first topic I like to bring up is the militarization of space. So we'll go ahead and open up this link to Wikipedia. And we're going ahead to have this paragraph read to us. And I'm going to go ahead and change the voice too, because we've been kind of change it up a bit. So let's see here. Okay.
The militarization.
Oh, that's a different voice. That's not the one. That one.
Militarization of space involves the placement and development of weaponry and military technology in outer space. The early exploration of space in the mid-20th century had, in part, a military motivation, as the United States and the Soviet Union used it as an opportunity to demonstrate ballistic missile technology and other technologies having the potential for military application. Outer space has since been used as an operating location for military spacecraft such as imaging and communication satellites, and some ballistic missiles pass through outer space during their flight. As of 2019, known deployments of weapons stationed in space include only the Almaz space station armament and pistols such as the TP-82 cosmonaut survival pistol, for post-landing, pre-recovery use.
So this Wikipedia page goes on to describe the history of militarization of space, largely based off of the Cold War, which was the major bipolar conflict between the United States and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR, or the Soviet Union. And then after the Cold War, there was kind of a lull, but then we start to see a continued militarization with military satellites, the development and the employment of global positioning systems, military communications systems, and military planes. And then it goes on to describe weapons in space and potential space warfare. And there are a number of space treaties. We learned about the Outer Space Treaty one, but I also want to pull up the Moon Treaty. I'll just read this here. The Moon Treaty, not ratified by any space-capable state, though signed by some, bans any military use of celestial bodies, including weapons testing, nuclear weapons in orbit, or military bases. The use of military personnel for scientific research or for any other peaceful purposes shall not be prohibited. So we know that there has been this move towards militarization in the abstract conversations, concerns, worries expressed by one country's government that other countries are heading in that direction, so they need to. So it's this functional strategic interaction between multiple countries around the world who are trying to decide whether they should cooperate on maintaining a peaceful space or that they need to defect because they feel like the other person's going to do it. So we call this a classic prisoner's dilemma, is that it would make sense intuitively that people should work together or countries should work together. But what ends up happening is that one person doesn't trust the other person sufficiently enough to say they're going to work together. So then they'll defect and they'll basically both lose out, even though they could have earned or gained more by working together. So we're in this period of time in the world's history where countries are kind of looking at each other with a wary eye, saying, you know, who's going to move first and trying to militarize space. With that said, we know that there is a race across countries to build what they call hypersonic weapons. So let me go ahead and pull up this article in Science. And I'll read the title here and I'll have the paragraph read to us. So, national pride is at stake. Russia, China, United States race to build hypersonic weapons. Despite hype and technological hurdles, a hypersonic arms race is accelerating. So let's go ahead and read these first three paragraphs.
High in the sky over northwestern China, a wedge-shaped unmanned vehicle separated from a rocket. Coasting along at up to Mach 6, or 6 times the speed of sound, the Xingkong 2 Waverider hypersonic cruise missile, HCM, bobbed and weaved through the stratosphere, surfing on its own shock waves. At least that's how the weapons developer, the China Academy of Aerospace Aerodynamics, described the August 2018 test. China did not release any video footage. The HCM's speed and maneuverability, crowed the Communist Party's Global Times, would enable the new weapon to break through any current generation anti-missile defense system. For decades, the US military and its adversaries have coveted missiles that travel at hypersonic speed, generally defined as Mach 5 or greater. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, meet that definition when they re-enter the atmosphere from space. But because they arc along a predictable ballistic path, like a bullet, they lack the element of surprise. In contrast, hypersonic weapons such as China's Waverider maneuver aerodynamically, enabling them to dodge defenses and keep an adversary guessing about the target. Since the dawn of the Cold War, the Pentagon has periodically thrown its weight behind the development of maneuverable hypersonic weapons, only to shy away when technological hurdles such as propulsion, control, and heat resistance proved daunting. You see a flurry of activity, a lot of investment, and then we conclude it's a bridge too far, says aerospace engineer Mark Lewis, Director of Defense Research and Engineering for Modernization at the U.S. Department of Defense, DoD. The community was underfunded and largely forgotten for many years, adds Daniel De Laurentiis, Director of Purdue University's Institute for Global Security and Defense Innovation.
I actually have this next paragraph read too.
Now,
It's like a child voice. It's changed again. Well, I'll go ahead and read it. So now DoD is leading a new charge, pouring more than $1 billion annually into hypersonic research. Competition from ambitious programs in China and Russia is a key motivator. Although hype and secrecy muddy the picture, all three nations appear to have made substantial progress in overcoming key obstacles, such as protecting hypersonic aircraft from savage frictional heating. Russia recently unveiled a weapon called the Kinzhal, said to reach Mach 10 under its own power, and another that is boosted by a rocket to an astonishing Mach 27. China showed off a rocket-boosted hypersonic glide vehicle, HGV, of its own, the Dongfeng 17, in a recent military parade. The United States, meanwhile, is testing several hypersonic weapons. It's a race to the moon sort of thing, said Ian Boyd, an aerospace engineer at the University of Colorado Boulder. National pride is at stake. So this article goes on to describe what each of those three countries is doing and what are some of the technical challenges, what are some of the kind of achievements that are being made just in this innovation of hypersonic weapons. And it just really raises the broader question, like, what does this mean for geopolitics? What does this mean for science and engineering? What does this mean for the future of not only warfare, but also in the balance of power here terrestrially on Earth, but also in outer space? Since many of the technologies that are developed for this hypersonic travel could and probably already do have commercial or non-military / civilian applications. So this is an example of conflict because we're seeing countries basically not cooperate in the purest sense, but they're in tension with each other. And I think if you relax the idea of conflict being like brute force attack, but more of conflict like they're not cooperating, then this is a prime example of that. So in addition to conflict, we do have cooperation. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull up the Outer Space Treaty again, because you might be asking, well, what's this all about? So let's go ahead and zoom in a bit. So it's a treaty on the principles governing the activities of states in the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies. So the Outer Space Treaty was considered by the Legal Subcommittee in 1966, and an agreement was reached in the General Assembly in the same year. The treaty was largely based on the declaration of legal principles governing the activities of states in the exploration and use of outer space, which had been adopted by the General Assembly in 1963, but added a few new provisions. The treaty was open for signature by 3 depository governments, the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America in January 1967, and it entered into force in October 1967. The Outer Space Treaty provides the basic framework on international law and includes the following principles. The exploration and use of outer space shall be carried out for the benefit and in the interest of all countries and shall be the province of all mankind. Outer space shall be free for exploration and use by all states. Outer space is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by other means. States shall not place nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction in orbit or on celestial bodies or station them in outer space in any other manner. The moon and other celestial bodies shall be used exclusively for peaceful purposes. Astronauts shall be regarded as the envoys of mankind. States shall be responsible for national space activities, whether carried out by governments or non-governmental entities. States shall be liable for damage caused by space objects. And states shall avoid harmful contamination of space and celestial bodies. So this lays out the framework for how states are at the center of space faring, of space governance, and of trying to maintain a peaceful space. But we know that this is changing because of those hypersonic weapons that are being developed and for other efforts that are being made in United States and around the world. The other example of cooperation I like to bring up is a little less kind of military and potential for warfare and things of that nature, and it's the James Webb Telescope. And I'm really excited by this. I've kind of, if you get to know me a little bit more, I'm kind of a tech nerd. Like I was really into robots, into other things when I was in high school and early college. I've always wanted to visit JPL. I tried to go when they launched one of the first Mars rovers, but my friend Kendrick and I got lost on our way there. We ended up at Caltech. We didn't find JPL. And just so you know, this was before like Google Maps and like those other things that make it super easy to get from point A to point B. Back in my day, we had to like look at a map, and that map led us to Caltech and not to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which was overseeing the launch and the science mission of the Mars rovers. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and pull up a couple of YouTube clips about the James Webb Telescope to give us a sense of what it is and why it's just such an amazing multi-billion-dollar piece of technology and what it means. So go ahead and pull up this. I kind of want to do this one. We'll go with that one. Looks like we have a little lag.
How did we get here? Big questions about who we are and how we got to be that way are at the core of our nature. We've developed technology to see amazingly far across space and also time. Light moves through space, just like we do, only much faster. It takes time to get somewhere. So, viewing the light of distant stars and galaxies is like looking into the past. It took time for the light to reach us. Yet, after all our years of exploring, to better understand ourselves and our origins, there is still so much to know. Our story stretches back more than 13 billion years, not long after the expansion of time and space first began. At some unknown time, the building blocks of life were forged in the heart of the first stars. But much of the early universe remains a mystery. There are theories about how gravity first brought stars, gas, and dark matter together to form galaxies. But that time period has never been observed. Detecting light from the first galaxies to form has been a challenge for even the most powerful telescopes. As the light early galaxies emitted traveled through space, that space itself was expanding, stretching the light to longer infrared wavelengths. Past telescopes have detected infrared light, but the faint light of the very first galaxies has remained out of reach. Until now. The James Webb Space Telescope is specially designed to detect the first galaxies. Webb's large mirror and sensitive instruments will enable it to collect more infrared light than we've ever seen, allowing the first galaxies to emerge into view. With Webb, we can begin filling in some of the blank pages at the beginning of the universe's story. When did the first galaxies form? How massive were they? What types of stars and elements did they contain? The universe's story is our story, and with Webb, we can finally explore these questions, as well as uncover new ones we haven't even thought to ask.
So it's pretty exciting because if you think about like the amount of time, energy, resources, intellect, human power to even just imagine this technology, it's like incredible. So this reminds me of one of my colleagues who's like deathly afraid of space or even thinking about it because like it makes you feel so small. And in my mind, like it doesn't make me feel small, it just makes you think about like the future and like what it holds. And so this is a prime example of cooperation. Both the treaty, this like kind of written principles that states or governments follow, and then the James Webb Space Telescope, which was a collective effort by the US, European, and other agencies, and just the entire science community, right? The idea that you launched this super sophisticated, probably the most sophisticated piece of equipment ever developed by humans after maybe the Large Hadron Collider in Europe. Like, it's incredibly fascinating. Like, and that only happens through cooperation. So what are some of the implications of all this action? Well, part of the reason I wanted to talk about space this week was because I saw an article that said that the Russian government was going to pull out of the International Space Station. Let me go ahead and pull up this article, and we'll end with this. In Reuters, they report, so Russia's new space chief announced on Tuesday, so that's today, that the country plans to withdraw from the International Space Station after 2024. But senior NASA officials said Moscow has not formally conveyed an intent to end its 2-decade-old orbital partnership with the United States. While high tensions between Moscow and Washington over Russia's invasion of Ukraine have raised months of doubt about future American-Russian space cooperation, the announcement by Yuri Borisov, the newly appointed Director General of Russia's space agency, Roscosmos, came as a surprise. Two former Cold War adversaries signed a crew exchange agreement less than 2 weeks ago, allowing U.S. astronauts and Russian cosmonauts to share flights on each other's spacecraft to and from this International Space Station in the future. And NASA Administrator Bill Nelson issued a statement reiterating the U.S. commitment to keeping the ISS in operation through 2030, adding that space agency is coordinating with our partners. So this just happened today. We'll see kind of how this unfolds over the next weeks and months and years. But this would be a pretty devastating blow to the International Space Station. So even with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the U.S. and Russia have managed to maintain a very healthy partnership around space exploration and travel and around the International Space Station, which you see pictured here. And by working together, you basically accomplished a lot more. There's doing advanced studies and other things in the space station, and even just getting to and from, fixing it. It's a lot of the stuff that you need to know how to do in order to do more advanced space travel, particularly human powered space travel. So to places like returning to the moon and going to Mars and beyond. So without that cooperation, we'll kind of see what happens. But this one of the implications of having this conflict, this tension on hypersonic weapons, on geopolitics that we're seeing in Ukraine and Russia and in Eastern Europe, these broader dynamics that the United States obviously is at the center of because of its global power status. And really just thinking like, what can we accomplish cooperatively, and what do we lose by not cooperating when it comes to space? And I think that's an open-ended question that time will help us answer as we see how these events unfold. With that, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen in. We're going to stop our recording and get to our discussion, but thanks for your time and take care.